Oh, hey everybody. Thanks for joining me for our May 15th live stream. I appreciate your patience for a few minutes while we go ahead and get started. I'm really excited to kick things off with you guys this semester and start answering some of your questions. Before we get started, though, I wanted to hit you up with a couple of quick recommendations, let you know a couple of things that have been helping keep me sane at the beginning of a really stressful semester. And the first thing I wanted to recommend here is a book that I've been into a lot by Neil Gaiman called Norse Mythology. If you're not familiar with Neil Gaiman, he writes a lot of really cool fiction stuff. He is written for comic books, including like the Sandman series. He has written a number of books that have turned into like TV shows or movies. Good Omens, that was on Amazon Prime, is one that he wrote. And one of the things that's cool is that he integrates a lot of like folk fiction and mythology and legend stuff into his stories. And what he did with Norse mythology is he took like all of your favorite characters that I guess have now shown up in the MCU, like Thor and Loki and Odin, and he takes the Norse mythology stories and writes them as stories and legends, which is really cool. It's a fun read. It's an entertaining read. He's a really fantastic author, and I like it a lot. But here's my deep, dark secret. I haven't actually been reading it from this book. I find it really hard to focus on a book, which I know is a horrible sin, right? But I find it really challenging to focus on a book when I've got other stuff going on. So often I feel like I can't sit still because like I'm taking care of Grady or I've got something else that needs to get done. So oftentimes I end up reading either on my phone when I have a chance, or more often than not, I end up listening to the audiobook. And the really cool thing is that for at least a number of Neil Gaiman's works, the audiobooks that like Audible has produced, he's the narrator on them, and he actually does a really, really good job. He does a fantastic job on Norse mythology. He did Neverwhere, which was a really good one, and then to American Gods, I think he narrates, even though they have actors who work in it. But here's a cool thing: if you're looking for like stuff to read as a little bit of escapism, which that kind of escapism is really good and healthy right now. You can get a lot of it for free rather than getting the Kindle stuff through Amazon or the Audible stuff, which you have to pay for. You can get it free through the library. And here's a really cool thing. I have taken forever to get anything through our library because you need a library card. And if you never got one, or like me, you lost it like a decade ago, it can be tough to borrow anything without that card. But during the COVID lockdown, our library set it up where you can borrow without a library card. So what's really neat is if you get on your phone and download an app called Libby, Libby, they'll have you log into the library. I just like put in my phone number. It said I was logged in, which is really cool. And then I could just search for whatever I wanted to read. Some stuff was on audiobook, some stuff was just like a Kindle version. And then you can read it on your phone. You can read it on a Kindle. You can listen to the audiobook. It's cool stuff. So as far as like recommendations to help keep you sane, that's what I've got so far. I want to thank everybody for sending in questions ahead of time. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question or you want to ask a follow-up, you can also just ask that, drop it in the chat there on the left hand, or I guess the right hand side of the screen. But I have a little bit of a structure for what I want to go through. I don't think the Q&A today is going to last forever. I want to try to hit some core questions, but I think we've got a nice tight list of stuff for what we want to get through. Real quick, can you guys hear me? If somebody be willing to tell me in chat, I guess you could also send a Canvas message. If you can hear this, I'll look for a message. If you can't hear it, I guess I won't see anything. So if you could just let me know that you're getting some audio and I don't have to start all over like explaining why I was waving this book around. So I appreciate a little bit of a heads up. So yeah, let's go ahead and we'll jump on this. As a quick heads up, for anybody who asked a question, the way I've got it set up is that you earn a bonus point for every week that you ask a question, meaning that if you ask a question every single week, I think counting finals week, you can get 14 bonus points this summer. What that means is bonus points added to your test total. So it's like taking 14 points and applying it to any given test. That's a letter grade and a half, like a letter grade and a half to any given test. So that's pretty cool stuff. Again, I'm going to ask in chat here just to make sure I'm using a slightly different setup. Can you guys hear me? Let's see if anybody pops in and tells me. I suppose it's possible we got people playing in the background, but we'll see. So anyways, I want you to ask questions every week so I can answer them. If you're here watching the stream concurrently, that's really awesome. If you're watching it after the fact, that's cool too. These will be up kind of as long as the link is, which is all semester long. So this is a great place to check in and get answers to your questions. I have you guys submit your questions 9 o'clock the day of the stream, so I have a chance to get that list together and also to compile that list. If you were to check back on the page where I've got the video posted, you'd see the list of questions that we're answering today, which is pretty cool. It gives you an idea of what all we're covering. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Our first couple of questions are about papers. And I know like the terminology is tough here, but for the most part, when we say papers, we mean research and analyze assignments. Those research and analyze assignments, I'm going to get to the questions here in a second, but those research and analyze assignments, they take up a pretty good chunk of your grade this semester, but keep in mind that there are several of them, and I drop your lowest one, which is really cool. So you have an opportunity to learn the first time around, and then go ahead and tool things up and do an even better job in the future, right? And I'm going to answer these couple of questions. Thank you, Kaylee, for letting me know that you can hear me. I'm going to answer these questions and then like maybe expound on it a little bit in terms of what we're looking for in these research and analyze papers. The first question says, are our papers going to require special formatting? And my answer here is no, that it's not going to require special formatting, but it'll be best if you use consistent formatting. The reason why I don't require any particular formatting, APA, MLA, Chicago, Turabian, whatever, is that frankly, when I sat down to think about what was the most important stuff that you could learn in this class, how to use Microsoft Word was not one of them. And in reality, if I grade you on your ability to use APA formatting, yes, attention to detail is important, but it's ultimately it's a really arbitrary system that tests your ability to use Microsoft Word to format a document. And frankly, I just don't think looks that great. I know it's like the American Psychological Association's formatting style, but personally, I think a formatting style like Chicago looks a lot better, mostly because footnotes don't get in the way of your ability to read. One of the things we'll talk about next week is fluency, and having those citations get in the way of your text doesn't help anybody out at all. Makes stuff easy to read. So you want to use a consistent formatting setup, right? Like have a title and a header, do double space 12-point font. The next question is going to be about length. In fact, the next question says, how long are papers? Well, there will be a maximum amount of words that you can't go over. I tend to write a lot. So when it comes to length and formatting here, when it comes to length and formatting, we want to keep in mind that there's a general formatting guideline that can be helpful: 1-inch margins, 12-point font, double spacing, so that when I say your paper should be about 4 pages long, you have an idea of what kind of length I'm looking for. Usually I'll also give you a word count, 1,000 words. And if you find yourself straying outside of this formatting, right, you're using bigger margins to make that paper look longer, or you're cutting down on your line spacing so it doesn't look quite as long, you're going to find that you're going to have a hard time with your grade, and not because you're using the wrong formatting, but because you've either written way too much or way too little. These things are guidelines, but ultimately not nearly as important as the substance of your paper. If you're really struggling, if I've got a 1,000-word essay you need to write, and you're really struggling to write 750 words, chances are there's something missing there that we really need to get into, and it's important to address the important stuff, right? What is it in your source that is the really valuable information? How can we critically evaluate that information and show that you really understand it deeply? If you find at the same time that you're going over and over and over, I ask for 4 pages and you give me 6, 7, 8 pages. This is a really great exercise in figuring out what the most important stuff is and cutting out all of the cruft that you don't need, right? Part of effective communication, and we'll talk about this too, is making sure that your message gets across. I've told you guys that I know I tend to go on, and I know that that's a problem. And so something I often struggle with in my own writing is getting down to that narrow point that really needs to be communicated. In this way, if you're able to cut things down to stay within that length limit, to get as close as you can to it, you know that you've really sharpened your message to a point, and that you're not going to be distracting the reader with a bunch of extra stuff. I'm going to jump over to the chat real quick where Nathalia asks, quick question, is extra, and I hope I pronounced your name even closer correct, it says, is extra credit given for the weekly live stream only given if questions are written in the discussion board or if we comment here as well? I think as long as you're asking a question that contributes to the discussion, if you ask something in the live stream, I think that works, but let's go ahead and try to, good faith effort. If you ask stuff ahead of time, it lets me integrate it into the list of questions. But if you think of something, go ahead and ask it, and I think we can hook you up with some extra credit. So yeah, in terms of the writing assignments themselves, remember that the goal of these assignments is, like it says, research and analyze, that you need to be able to demonstrate that you've done research and you're analyzing that information. Take a look at the first research and analyze assignment, in fact, and you'll find that I'm asking you to do research and to demonstrate your ability to do research skills without even diving into like academic stuff. In fact, without diving into any traditional sources at all. I ask you to research yourself, thinking about your own experiences, talking to other people, and collecting documents that have to do with you. And this is because I wanted to, without getting into the mechanics of accessing library sources, I wanted to see what you could do in terms of research. So what you want to do on this first writing assignment, for example, is really keep that in mind, that as tempting as it is to just go on talking about yourself at length, ultimately I'm looking for your ability to take a source and look at it and tell me about it and think critically about it. And ultimately with this one, you want to talk about what's wrong with that source. So let's switch really quickly and go from talking about papers to talking about tests. I have a number of questions about the kind of like formatting and overall structure of tests. The first says, are questions in the test multiple choice? What are tests like? Well, we have a study guide to review before the test, and then a specific question about the material. Do you have questions that ask about what happened in a particular year on the test, right? That way you need to, if you need to know particular years. What you can expect from tests is this. Test questions take a number of formats, usually multiple choice and essay, though sometimes I'll have a fill-in-the-blank, matching, or true-false kind of questions. But for the most part, you can expect to have somewhere between 20 and 30 multiple choice questions, and then also a short essay. Now, I want to help you out, and I want you to be able to do a really good job on these essay questions, though. So if you were to take a look at the instructions for test 1, what you would see is that I've got the prompt for the essay right there in the instructions, meaning that before we even get to the material that's going to be in that essay, you can look at that and start thinking ahead and looking for those terms and planning out your response. This is me telling you ahead of time what the really important information is. I'm asking you to write an essay on it because it's important, and you can save yourself a lot of time and stress and aggravation if you plan out that response ahead of time, which is really cool. I write all of the questions, though, so these aren't questions from a question bank. They ask you about material from the textbook, but also from assigned videos, podcasts, additional articles, activities if we have them. You'll take the implicit associations test later, and I'll ask you questions about that. And in terms of what you want to know from this, it's not about what you need to know, it's about what you need to understand. You want to be at a point, by the time you're getting into these tests, you want to be at a point where you can, with each term, come up with your own definition, where you can come up with examples, and you can figure out how to connect these ideas together. If you can do that sort of stuff, you know what you need to know about these terms and about these ideas. It's important to know key terms. So, for example, like what is social psychology? What is situationalism? What are schemas and construals? But you also want to know really important and impactful studies. You'll want to know from this first chapter, for example, about Howard Leventhal, right, and the Yale tetanus study. And you'll want to know about... oh my God, I can't believe I'm blanking it. But you'll want to know about these really important historical figures, especially early on. And there's some studies that you'll be familiar with from general psychology or even your own experience. People like Stanley Milgram and Philip Zimbardo and Solomon Asch. These big names are big for a reason. And we're going to talk about some of these studies in greater depth, so we'll want to know them too. I know a lot of times it can feel like a lot, especially if you don't have like a study guide. But when we think about it, like, if I could hand you a study guide that said this was the most important stuff, this is what you need to know, then it's like, why would we be doing all of this other stuff, right? I don't want tests to feel like they're a big surprise and I'm trying to trick you and I'm playing some game where you don't know what it is you need to study, right? Like, ooh, I'm going to ask you these tricky questions. It's none of that nonsense. It's just that, like, there are important pieces of information and important experiences, and I give you these pieces of media like the videos and the podcast because I think they do a really good job of not just communicating a term and a definition, but making that information important and accessible and understandable. So one of the things I'd give you guys a heads up about the first test usually is one of the toughest ones because you haven't had my test before, you're not sure how to study for my class, you're not sure what kind of questions I'm going to ask. So we're going to go in, we're going to take it, and then keep in mind that I drop your two lowest ones. What you should probably do is when the first test becomes available, go ahead and take it, and then reach out to me right away so we can talk about how you got the grade you got and what we can do differently to get an even better grade in the future. Moving on from tests to talking kind of about psychology classes more generally. Is social psychology anything like general psychology? Wondering because I had a general psychology class with you last year, which is great. I think actually Sam, who jumped in chat, may have asked this one also. One of the great things about teaching at a place like Santa Fe is I get students who pop in and out of my classes, and it's always awesome to see familiar faces. In terms of what this class is, if you've had general psychology, then you know that general psychology is a survey class that introduces you to a ton of different concepts. Every week you've got a whole new, what might be called a school of psychology. And then, both at Santa Fe and then especially at the University of Florida, you can have an entire second level course on any of those weeks of material. And then there are even higher level courses that could take a week of that material and turn it into a whole class. So for example, you spend a week studying developmental psychology and there's a class on that. You spend a week studying abnormal psychology, there's a class on that. Same thing with like social psychology. And what social psychology really is, and I know I say it's like why everyone is terrible, you don't know who people are, you don't know who you are. Ultimately, I struggle with the term social psychology because there are a lot of findings that come out of social psychology that aren't really, well, social. For example, there's a lot of study into boredom. One of my favorite social psychology studies, it didn't tell people that they were in a boredom study, but it invited them to come into a study, and a person would be sat alone in a room by themselves. They'd be told that there was this piece of equipment here they didn't need to worry about, but that they were told it would administer a mild electric shock. They were shown what the shock felt like, right? And then they were told to just sit quietly and wait, and that the person running the experiment would be back in a couple of minutes. And the person would then be left for 15 minutes. And what they found is that the majority of people, I think it was 50% of women and then 75% of men, administered shocks to themselves more than once because they were bored, right? That we'd rather experience an electric shock than be bored. And it's a really cool finding. And it says something about how much we hate boredom. But it's also like, what does that have to do with social psychology? And that's because as much as like we've got that social term from social psychology, a better term might be situational psychology. That what we're doing this term, in contrast to development, which is all about like how you become who you are, or cognitive psychology is about how your mind works, or biological psychology is about how the brain works, right? That 3-pound piece of meat in your head. This class is all about how the situation in which you find yourself makes you the person that you are, right? So that's ultimately what we're doing this week, or doing this semester. It's also, like I said, a research and analyze course, meaning that you're getting a lot of practice in writing and planning and rewriting and researching and analyzing sources. So I hope that we're going to have a lot of fun with that stuff. I try to give you guys some assignments and exercises that aren't just like write a 10-page paper, right? Because that's boring. So we'll do more fun stuff. Let me see here. Next one. Will we be having a scheduled class time like a Zoom call, or will we be watching videos? Well, kind of both. The live stream that we're doing right now is the only regularly scheduled thing that we're going to have, at least that I have planned right now. I know that one of the reasons many people sign up for online classes is that you got a lot of other stuff going on. And when you got a lot of other stuff going on, it's not really fair of me to say that you need to be available at a particular time every day or every week. So with that being said, if you want to be successful, you want to look at every week's read, watch, listen, do material as seriously as you would class time. You're able to schedule it yourself, but if you're like me, you know that that's actually more of a detriment than a strength. It can be really hard to do that. So my advice would be to schedule a little bit of time, the same time every single day, so you get those 12 hours a week in, and you're able to dedicate that time to reading, watching, listening to, and doing stuff. And then if you're not able to watch these live streams while live, that you spend time catching up on that stuff later too. Moving on from talking about the class structure, our next couple of questions have to do with like skills for being successful and study skills. I already alluded to this briefly, but the first question says, how much study time weekly will this course take to be successful? And then a second question, because I'm going to hit that first one real fast. The second question says, what is the best way to study and retain names of people and ideas in psych? So, in terms of the amount of time that you need to spend to be successful, the specific, explicitly articulated rule that I and the college have is 12 hours a week. Our standard structure for something like this is that you spend about an hour in class per credit and 3 hours at home per credit, which means that for an online class like this, that's a total of 4 hours per week per credit for a 3 hour class is going to be 12 hours per week spent on it. Some people are going to need more than that. Some people are going to need less than that. Some weeks are going to need more, and some weeks are going to need less. But if you find yourself struggling in this class, the very first thing you need to do is talk to me. The second thing you need to do is ask yourself, are you finding 12 hours a week to work on this? And are you spending that time constructively and successfully? Because 12 hours isn't 12 hours. If you try to work from 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening, 1 day a week, that won't be nearly as successful as if you spent close to half the time, but just an hour a day every single day out of the week. That would be far more helpful. If you want to talk about why that is, I'm always happy to sit down and have a conversation about like why this kind of distributive processing, this regular rehearsal is better for your memory. But really what would be really good to do is spend an hour, and what would be better than that is 2 hours every day out of the week. And that could be spent reading, watching, listening to stuff, reviewing, taking notes, studying for tests, pre-writing, planning, writing, revising. There's a ton of stuff that you could spend time on. And one of the most important things, though, is to just like block out that time so you can spend time on it. In terms of how to study, I think something that can be really helpful is to share tips with each other. In fact, I think maybe next week or the week after, we'll have a discussion about some of these study techniques. But this question, like, what's the best way to study and retain the names of people? People and ideas can be a little bit different, but what I like to do is think about, like, what is it that we remember well and remember poorly? We're really good, for example, at faces. So if you're going to study people, what can be really helpful is to look at pictures of them, watch videos that have these people. Watching an interview of somebody like Stanley Milgram or Philip Zimbardo or Solomon Asch makes it really hard to forget who these people are because they're memorable individuals. Ideas, concepts, key terms, on the other hand, what really ends up being key here is to engage yourself as much as you can while you study them. So rather than just like breezing through a page of terms and saying like, well, I looked at them and that's good, or I wrote them down and that's good, writing definitions in your own words, coming up with examples, these are both really key because you engage your brain much more. You're being more creative, which elevates your depth of or deepens your processing, elevates your level of processing, right? So that you're engaging with it on a higher level. But especially when you come up with examples that connect to your everyday life, you're then engaging something called the self-reference effect, which in cognitive psychology and education we employ to help explain why we remember certain things better than others. Specifically, the self-reference effect says that we remember stuff better when it applies directly to us. So if you can look at a term and make it apply to you, it's going to make it way harder to forget it, way easier to remember it. Something that can be really good, though, is to come up with some more personalized advice. Study, get ready for that first test, take it, see what you had a hard time on, and then come talk to me, and we can work together to come up with a personalized plan that'll work really well for you. I've got a couple of more wide-ranging questions here. I think the next 4 questions are a bit more wide-ranging, and the first one says, what are the benefits of having good relationships with other people and the costs of being lonely? This is a really timely question, right, as we're all dealing with the COVID stuff. And it's like, I don't want to introduce additional stress, but this is a question that has been of really, really deep importance to psychologists, especially lately, given that in the last couple of years there has been mounting evidence that the biggest threat to long-term health is not obesity like we thought. It's not smoking, it's not drinking, it's not poor diet or lack of exercise. In fact, the single greatest risk factor for long-term health and longevity itself is loneliness, that being lonely is really, really bad for your health. There are a number of reasons for this, but it's kind of the flip side of something that we've known for a long time, which is that one of the biggest protective factors against stuff like depression and anxiety is a healthy and robust support system. So having people that you're close to and that you can talk to and that you can engage with, that's something that protects against anxiety and depression. And it turns out that anxiety and depression can affect your physical health in a really big way. So if you're somebody who struggles with this sense of isolation, especially right now, it's a really great time to seek out people to engage with. I'm somebody you can engage with. There are your classmates who are really great people to engage with. Santa Fe has a number of people to work with. And then what's really cool is that now there are even like mental health resources that are available through like telehealth services. I'm not going to plug like any particular service, but an example is like BetterHelp, which is an example of online counseling that you can do, which is really great. But now is a good time to be looking at some of these more creative ways to engage with other people. For example, I play video games. And even though like I'm really busy and my brother, who I used to play video games with a lot, is really busy and we live in different states, we used to take time all the time to play games. Now it's funny, we're stuck at home, we're even busier. So we started doing things like we were playing the game Animal Crossing, right? Which we can like play and talk about, or sometimes I'll stream stuff on Twitch for him to watch, or vice versa, which is kind of cool, right? So that there are these ways to engage with people, even if it's indirect, even if it's not like synchronous at the same time. But yeah, definitely. Like if you're feeling lonely and you're feeling isolated, it's a really great time to reach out to somebody, even if it's just somebody like me, right? Because we can talk, we can plan a way forward, and help get you on track to being in the place that you want to be in. The next few questions have to do with the field of psychology. Our first one asks about the mental health side of psychology. What do you think about the mental health side of psychology? Working in mental health is my ultimate goal, and this is fantastic. I get a lot of students who want to work in mental health. One of the things that is tough about mental health is that the pathway there is not necessarily like really straightforward or direct. The same way that you might like say you would go to law school to study law, or you'd go to med school to study medicine, there are a number of different pathways to end up being somebody who works in mental health. If you want to become a licensed mental health counselor, if you want to become a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a researcher, an instructor. And so one of the best things to do if you're interested in a career in mental health would be to, again, I don't mean to like hammer on the same thing over and over, but come and talk to me. Like, I know about a lot of this stuff. I can connect you with the people who can help you figure out exactly what your best path is, but we can definitely figure out a way forward from here. What's really helpful is that if I can help you identify a path that'll take you where you want to be, then you end up avoiding wasting a lot of time doing things that aren't going to be particularly constructive, and you can make informed decisions about things like, do you want to go to graduate school for 2 years and get a master's and have somebody who's be a licensed mental health counselor, or do you want to end up going to school for 7 years so that you can be a psychologist with a PhD? There are pluses and minuses to both of these, and we can talk together and figure that out together. Next question, does social psychology have correlations in mental health? For example, can aspects of social psychology also impact an individual's mental health? Absolutely. I think often we imagine that mental illness is kind of like it's this categorical thing, but mental illness and wellness are a lot like physical illness and wellness, right? Like the most extreme version of a mental state that might get you a diagnosis is something that affects you on an everyday basis where you absolutely cannot function. But not everybody suffers from something like major depressive disorder. There are a lot of people who feel sad or down, or they feel kind of or even very sad or down, or like they have a lack of energy, but it's not so bad that they can't function. Are these people who don't need treatment, right? And how did we end up there in the first place? And it turns out there's a lot of social psychology at play here. There's a lot of stuff that we automatically do, for example, in the way that we relate to and compare ourselves to others. There are a lot of ways in which we construct and perpetuate situations that make us feel bad. And if we can tackle these things, they can, if you're not suffering from a mental illness, they can improve your mental health and help protect you. And if you are somebody who's been diagnosed with a mental challenge, this is something that can help improve your situation dramatically. A lot of people, there's a big misconception, a lot of people imagine that if you suffer from a diagnosable mental condition that you need medication, or you need to be hospitalized, or you need intensive therapy, but this is absolutely not the case. There are a lot of ways in which mental health professionals can help anybody, and there's really pretty much no risk to talking with somebody like that. Our last question for today, what led you to be interested in social psychology as well as psychology as a whole? Were there any moments that allowed you to know that you made the right choice by choosing what you did? This is interesting because if you've taken my in-person classes and I've had a chance to do kind of my spiel and introduction to myself, you know that I never planned to become a psychologist, much less a psychology professor. I kind of accidentally ended up here. I picked psychology as a major in undergrad because it required no chem, no calc, no bio. Like that was really pretty much it. I'd had a psychology class. I thought it was interesting, but I knew I hated chem, calc, and bio. By the time I finished with my undergrad, though, I ended up studying neuroscience. I ended up tackling those things that I was afraid of, realizing they were pretty interesting, but I still liked psychology. But here's the thing, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And I knew I was coming up to my senior year where I'd have to figure it out. And I'm like, I don't know. So I applied to graduate school and I went on to grad school. And at grad school, I worried pretty much for 4 years that I'd made the wrong decision until ultimately I left my graduate program. If you're interested in studying psychology, we can talk about what that experience was like and why ultimately I decided to leave without getting my PhD. But I left really with no plans and no straightforward path, and kind of lucked into a job at Santa Fe. And then it turned out I could teach a class, and so then I did. And then a full-time teaching job opened up, so I applied for that and I got it. And it was just this series of really lucky, really fortunate situations. But ultimately, the reason I love social psychology, and as much as I studied neuroscience, and ultimately that's what my graduate training is in, I feel this deep connection with social psychology and with sociology. It's about the biology that we don't recognize, those genes, those neurotransmitters that come into play that we don't think about. Whereas social psychology and sociology, stuff like this, it's about the situation, the setting that we're often really dismissive about and that we're really quick to ignore and let go of. That when somebody says that they failed to meet expectations because of some situational factor, we're quick to say that they shouldn't make excuses. But when the same thing happens to us, we think of it as an entirely legitimate explanation, right? And I really love this idea that we not only do things for reasons we don't necessarily understand, but even the way that we understand the world is a result of factors that we don't pay attention to. For example, and then I'll stop giving you guys examples and I'll let you go. But if you take a look at material on social attribution, I think it's week 4 of the semester. It's in module 2. You'll see I've included some really interesting stuff on the differences between people who have and don't have money. And this is not about what the people who have money have done to become successful. Why are they special people? Because ultimately social psychology would say they aren't. They're just really lucky people who happen to be in situations that allowed them to be successful. It's about how having money changes who you are as a person. And that ultimately the people who gain power and influence and money, they can start out as really good people, but that being in those positions of privilege can change us in really subtle at first, but ultimately very tremendous ways, which is really cool stuff. So, I could talk for hours and hours and hours about this because you're going to see hours and hours and hours of video this semester. I think if you're watching this stream, then clearly you want to be successful in the class, and I know that you can be. The single most important thing you can do if you want to be successful is to be in touch with me. One of my favorite things about being an instructor is I have the opportunity to work with students to be successful and figure out what they as individuals need to be successful in a class like this. How do we develop the tools to get you where you need to be? So I'll look forward to seeing you guys in more streams like this. If you've got more questions, reach right out to me. Email me pretty much anytime. You can also call or text at 352-327-8259. I can't always get to you right away. I might be elbow deep in baby mess or asleep or something, but I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you do text, let me know who you are so that I don't think I'm getting hit up by some scammer. And then of course, come see me during office hours. I love to chat. So I've got office hours from 2 to 3 on Monday and Wednesday, and then from 6 to 8 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So you don't even need an appointment. You just drop in and say, hey, and I'll love to chat with you. So thanks you guys for joining me for the first Q&A. I'll look forward to a really awesome semester and a bunch of the rest of these. If you have questions, let me know. But here's my formal official welcome to social psychology. I'm looking forward to a great 13 weeks. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.